All right. Hello, all you headbangers out there. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. So, this is kind of fun for me. This is the first time I've sat down in front of the camera to make a new video in a while. A couple of months ago, I recorded several videos while I had a short break at work. I knew that, the late spring is a very busy time. It'll be hard for me to find a lot of time to sit and record. So I kind of banked a lot of videos, and I've been posting those every week on Tuesday mornings so that folks have always had some new content to check out. But yeah, now that the dust has settled a little bit, I've got time to start recording some new ones and get some new content out there. So it'll be fun to get back in the swing of things. What I thought I would cover for this episode is not so much an album or a set of albums, but something that I've been reading. Going to talk a little bit about Confess, the Rob Halford autobiography that came out just a year or two ago. Before I get into that, however, I wanted to say thank you to Rick Contreras over on the Dreadful Minutes channel. Rick recently sent me a little VCLT package, which was very kind of him, just kind of arrived out of the blue, wasn't expecting it. I had a couple of neat CDs included. There's one by a band called Vindictive. I hadn't heard of this band before. It's a Swedish band, but it turns out it is the band that Tommy Karavik was the vocalist for before he left to join Seventh Wonder. And of course, now Tommy also sings with Camelot as well as Seventh Wonder. Now, he never released an album with Vindictive. He doesn't sing on this album. But yeah, kind of a cool historical tie-in there with one of my favorite vocalists. I haven't played these yet, so can't comment on what they sound like. We'll save that for maybe a future episode of What's Spinning or something like that. The other one that Rick sent looks really interesting. It's by a band called Bible Black, which is a name that's been used by several different acts over the years. This particular one sounds very interesting. It's not one I've heard of before, but basically it's some demos recorded in the early 1980s by a New York-based sort of supergroup. It's got a couple of guys, including Gary Driscoll, who had been in bands like Rainbow before and played with Black Sabbath member, live member on tour and such. And then also the first vocalist they tried out was Eric Adams. Then they worked with other vocalists when Eric didn't work out and went with Manowar instead. One of the later vocalists also featured on some of the demos is Joey Belladonna. So yeah, kind of a weird mixture of guys who had already been in some big name bands and some guys who would go on to be in huge heavy metal bands down the road. So yeah, I'm looking forward to checking this out. I've never heard of this particular lineup of Bible Black. I've heard of some other bands with that name, but not the same act whatsoever. So then the last thing Rick had in the box was a kind of fun t-shirt. It's from a coffee house in Philly called Gore, was it? Gore Grind, I want to get it wrong. Let's see. Yes, grindcore house. So kind of part heavy metal, part coffee. I'll take the heavy metal part. Somebody else can have the coffee. Coffee is not my thing, but yeah, really cool shirt. I'll be wearing that around. Thanks, Rick, very much. Really nice of you to send that stuff along. All right, so without further ado, let's talk a little bit about Rob Halford's Confess book. So this is one I'd been meaning to pick up and recently threw it in when I was ordering some other stuff on Amazon. So I'll start by just kind of giving a little bit of a description of the book, and then we'll get into a few of the kind of fun trivia facts that are included along the way. So first off, it's a very easy read if you're doing any travel this summer, hanging out by the pool, and you just want something fun that's going to be kind of a light reading, but also ties into heavy metal. This is a good option for it. It's also a very, very recent release. Halford finished it up and worked on it during the pandemic. So it covers pretty much everything the band has done to point, except for this most recently announced tour, the ill-fated decision to try to go with a four-man lineup that they had to sort of backtrack on. That's about the only thing that's happened to Judas Priest since this book came out. There's, it's written, of course, autobiographically. So it starts with his childhood, talks some about growing up. It begins with a very sort of interesting story of how he always had to walk past, this giant, smelting plant as a kid on his way to school. And, just, seeing, this kind of molten metal, it, all the pollution that it generated in the air, where it was really nasty to have to walk across this one stretch of bridge. It just kind of, paints, a really neat picture of how he was exposed to heavy metal, even, basically at elementary school age. Yeah, the book goes through, of course, the different, iterations of Priest. Um, it's a fun read. It's interesting. I like Halford's writing style. It's pretty direct. He's kind of self-deprecating. He has no problem, talking about his own flaws and missteps along the way. He doesn't really try to conceal any of that stuff, it doesn't seem. There's a good dose of humor throughout the book as well, which is always fun. If I'm going to sort of, nitpick a little bit, I would have liked a little more, in-depth stuff about Priest interactions, other band members. There are some things that, it feels like it kind of describes, we're recording the album. Yeah, the album comes out, we tour for the album, and then just kind of moves, right along. Sometimes it would have been nice maybe to have had, a little deeper dive on some of the Priest classics maybe, but a lot of that's also been discussed to death over the years, so maybe it's not as important to cover it here. There's a lot of stuff also about, Halford's personal life. He talks quite a bit, about his struggles, trying to be, a gay man in the closet for this sort of, uber macho heavy metal band, and, a lot of the anxiety that created for him of, like, I can't come out, I can't let anybody know, it could ruin, this band that I love, it could screw it up for all my band members. So yeah, that's kind of interesting to see his perspective behind the scenes. There's nothing wrong with that. There is a lot of, sort of personal stuff about his, romantic trysts over the years. Now, when it comes to, rock star autobiographies, I think there's generally two kinds of people in the world. There are the ones who want to hear all the cool little trivia facts about the band's history. That's me. And then there are the people who just want to hear, how many groupies did you bang? That's not me. So yes, it's really interesting to hear about some of Halford's tales when they were traveling in parts of Europe and how that did or didn't go at times. I'm a lot less interested in knowing how many glory holes he visited while on tour in Texas. That information's in here. There's nothing wrong with it. Doesn't bother me, but it's just not why I read these kind of books. I don't need to know every guy that you hooked up with on the road. Just like I don't need to know, how many girls, were waiting at the hotel for, Nikki Sixx when Motley Crue was on tour or anything like that. That side of, the touring cycle and stuff, that's not why I'm reading these books. Rob is not shy about going into the details on those kind of encounters in the book. So, that is something that you're going to read quite a bit about if you read Confess. So yeah, overall, good book. Glad I picked it up. Nice read. But yeah, let's go through a few of the kind of interesting little trivia facts that popped up along the book. Now, this again is being told from Rob's point of view. Other band members might have a slightly different take on some of this stuff, but again, seems to be pretty open and honest about most things in the book. So I doubt he's skewing his opinion on any of these items, but other members might have a very different perspective. But still, so there's 6 things in particular that kind of stood out to me as like, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, I thought that was different. Okay, I guess I was wrong. So the first thing kind of involves the Judas Priest Iron Maiden rivalry. There's always been this notion that the two bands were competitive with each other, didn't like each other, didn't get along very well, or something. And that even spilled over into the fan base, that a lot of people in the 1980s apparently thought they had to be either an Iron Maiden fan or a Judas Priest fan, that they weren't supposed to like both bands. That always seemed strange to me. Folks I knew growing up, that wasn't a thing, but I did meet people later, like in college, that, they were very much all about one band and had no interest in the other whatsoever. I never really understood what that was about, but Rob details in the book that, starting out, the two bands had no issue with each other, but where that perceived rivalry came from was when Iron Maiden was getting ready to open for Judas Priest on an early North American tour. This would have been early 80s, probably Killers cycle for Iron Maiden. And Paul Di'Anno kind of, brashly stated that, yeah, it's exciting to, come tour America again and open for Priest, and we're going to totally blow Priest off the stage every single night. And Halford says, this didn't bother him. He's used to bands doing that kind of smack talk. He's like, hey, it's the kind of thing we used to do when we were the opening band and, having to go out with bigger acts. But he said in particular, KK Downing really took issue with that statement from Di'Anno. Halford points out several examples along the way of where KK is somebody who will hold a grudge. When something gets under his skin, he, from Rob's perspective, has a hard time letting it go. And that, a little quip by Di'Anno that they were going to blow Priest off the stage every night. And this, when Priest is, again, headlining world tours, KK did not take kindly to that. And that's where, some of the animosity kind of piled up between those two bands at that time. So that's kind of, the origin point of Maiden and Priest not necessarily getting along all the time. Okay, odd fact number 2, spelled out in the book. There's been this perception, and I've said this before on other videos, and I've heard other YouTube content creators say this as well, that Priest was very unsuccessful during their early run of albums for CBS. That, the albums like Sin After Sin, Stay in Class, we think of them today as classics, but there's been this notion that the band financially was doing terrible at the time. Some folks have quipped that, the band had to record British Steel and kind of change gears and start writing hits because they were, quote unquote, starving to death and stuff. You really don't get that perspective from Halford when he's discussing that period of the band's history. No, they were not, quadzillionaires or anything. They weren't making Scrooge McDuck kind of money with Sin After Sin or Stained Class. But you don't get the notion that they were, struggling to make ends meet or anything either. You do get that perception from Halford when he's talking about the time frame more like around Rock-a-Rolla and Sad Wings of Destiny when they were on the Gull Records label. But once they moved to CBS and, were putting out Sin After Sin and such, the portrait that Halford conveys is that, the band was on kind of, a very steady upward trajectory. Each album was doing better than the previous one. Each album was selling more. The tours were getting bigger. The tour support was getting bigger. The fan base was, growing. That, they went from, maybe one, sort of crappy van to next time out, it's a much nicer van. Next time out, it's a bus. Next time out, it's a really good tour bus. So, you don't get the sense that, the band was living off of, stale bread and, things they dug out of the dumpster behind Arby's while they toured across America or anything. From Halford's perspective, it sounds like the band was, steadily doing better and better and better with each album. And then of course, finally broke monumentally big with the release of British Steel. But it seems like, from his point of view, they were always getting, closer and closer each step along the way, and that they had, really solid support from CBS as well, which to an extent, when you think about it, makes sense. If this band was really flailing and having trouble selling records, CBS wouldn't have been sending them to tour places like Japan necessarily. Granted, tour cycles and label support were very different in the 1970s than they came to be since then. But it seems like Priest, was probably doing pretty well and going from strength to strength from that period rather than just, barely eking out a living until breaking the law made them into, rock superstars. All right. Fun fact number 3 that came out of the book. Rob Halford apparently never really meant to quit Judas Priest. Now, this is a weird little story, but the way Halford explains it is that it came down to some really hurt feelings between management when he was trying to do some solo recordings. His version of the story goes that after the Painkiller tours had wrapped up, they did the think it was like Operation Rock and Roll Tour, which was sort of a military themed thing with Desert Storm going on. That he was very burned out. Everyone in the band was. He got injured at the very end of that tour as well. And he had been knocking around the idea of doing something as a solo project for a while. He'd already talked to the band about it years ahead of time. They were like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Go for it. Lots of people do that. No big deal. And so after the Painkiller tours had wrapped up, he figured that's a good time to do this. Kind of need to step away, take a break, do something a little different. When he tried to explain it to management, however, they got really upset about it, and it kind of took it to mean that he was trying to ditch them and go solo and with a different manager and stuff. So they got very confrontational about it. And something you learn about Halford through this book is that he's not good with confrontation. This goes back to stuff in his childhood. You can read about it, but that he really, really doesn't want to get up in people's faces and argue points a lot. And essentially management was passing it along to other people, and he was in the US, the other guys were back in England. And so the communication was basically sort of morphed from Rob is going to be working with different management on this solo thing to Rob's ditching you guys for new management and a new career, which was not what Halford had intended at all. Why wasn't this straightened out faster? Why did it take so long? Again, Halford really attributes it to just his real fear of confrontation and just physical distance. This is early 90s. You couldn't just send emails back and forth or text one another. It was just a very awkward situation that got out of hand. So goofy, but apparently he never wanted to leave Priest just to do the other projects. The other projects were just meant to be a one-off on the side while he was still a member of Judas Priest. All right, fun fact number 4. Halford speaks pretty positively about just about every Judas Priest album. He points out the well-known problems they had getting Rock-a-Rolla recorded and how that was kind of a disappointment to the band. That's not news to anybody. It's not a surprise. The one that may surprise some folks, though, is the one album that he really gave a big thumbs down to. It's not Turbo, which is the one a lot of people might have suspected. It's Point of Entry. Halford does not care for that album. In his opinion, it was the first time Priest really dropped the ball and put out a substandard album. And he's, again, seems to be pretty honest about it. He's like, after the success of British Steel, we felt like, hey, okay, write big hits, put things on the radio. And when they went back to the studio to record stuff, he's like, we got completely distracted with the entire party mentality. We'd had a big dose of success. We were partying it up all the time, and we just didn't put in the work to make sure we made a good follow-up album. He points out there's 2 or 3 songs on the album he likes, but overall, he's very dismissive of the Point of Entry album. He's like, I hate the album cover. I don't like the song titles. He's like, my lyrics are terrible. He's like, why did I call it Point of Entry? What are these songs about? He's like, I dropped the ball. We did not approach the album correctly. Halford asserts that Priest was always, pretty tight in the studio. They went in, focused, put a lot of effort into the stuff. He's like, this is the one time we really didn't, and it shows, and it's very clearly, I think, his least favorite Priest album. Everything else, even Turbo, he talks about in a very positive manner. Ram It Down in those albums, he's, very positive about things going on. But, Point of Entry, not so much. All right, fun fact number 5 here. There's the really lambasted Johnny B. Goode cover on the Ram It Down album, which everyone is just like, why is that song on this album? Well, originally there was a chance that song wasn't going to be on that album. It was sort of originally recorded for a soundtrack opportunity they had been approached to do. But it was going to, and so the band was like, yeah, okay, we can do a song for that. And they wanted, I guess like a classic rock song cover. So they did Johnny B. Goode. But at the end of the day, there was, contractual stuff like, well, we're going to put it on the soundtrack and you guys can't put it on anything else. Like, well, we might want to put it on something else. Bottom line, it kind of fell through. They didn't end up, contributing it to the soundtrack, and so it ended up, it's already recorded. Let's put it somewhere, and they unfortunately decided to put it on the Ram It Down album, where it's always stuck out like a sore thumb. But it wasn't originally intended for that. It was meant as, a soundtrack thing, which bands often will pick, sort of goofy songs or other, they're not always putting like, their big main hit song on those sometimes. So that's why Johnny B. Goode is on Ram It Down. All right, fun fact here, number 6. Halford actually sang with a different heavy metal band in the early 1980s. So while he was doing Judas Priest, he also did live appearances with a Florida band called Rocks. Now, I've mentioned Rocks in a previous video on some obscure US heavy metal singles. It's this one right here. He ended up befriending Yoel Vasquez, who was the guitar player for Rocks, later went on to also play in Diving for Pearls. And now this was never an official thing. He was never an official member of the band, but Rocks had a good local following on the Florida scene, and they often played at one of the clubs Halford liked to frequent when he was just, going out at night, having a few drinks, partying. And so a lot of times he would get up and do some songs with Rocks. Again, became really good friends with some of the members. Even for years later, he talks about hanging out with one of the guys, getting back in touch with them, hang out with his girlfriend a lot. So Halford was sort of an unofficial, guest vocalist for this band Rocks, who had a lot of Priest covers in their live repertoire, apparently, as well. So, kind of just a fun little thing he did there on the side. All right, and then last one, number 7. There is this sort of persistent urban rumor that Rob Halford used to work in a porno shop. At the time Halford published the book, he even mentions this rumor is even on my Wikipedia page, which somebody keeps putting it on there. So the deal with that is for 2 weekends, he filled in for a buddy who was like on a vacation. And there was a porn store that, he would sometimes stop by in, England near where he lived. And, one day the guy mentions like, hey, I've got to go. I'm basically going to be out of town, vacation, something for, a couple of weekends here. Would you mind filling in for me? I don't want to close the store. All you got to do is sit here and, be cashier. I'll pay you for your time if you want to do it. And Halford's like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. So, he was never an official employee. The guy who actually maybe owned and ran the store probably never even knew that it happened. But that's the extent of Halford's, history of working in the, porn industry. He was, not some longtime employee or anything like that. This guy needed somebody to sit behind the counter and man the cash register for a couple of days on a couple of weekends. And Halford said, yeah, sure, I can help you out and do that. So that is the extent of his tenure working in the smut shop. All right, so that's a handful of the kind of fun and different facts that people have gotten wrong or misinterpreted from Halford's perspective. Again, some folks might disagree. I haven't read some of the other Priest volumes that have come out. I know other members have written things too. So others may have different opinions. So let's now wrap this up and let's talk metal in the comments down below. What are some of the other fun Judas Priest trivia bits that you've heard along the way? Or maybe some of the different rumors and innuendo that used to swirl around the band that eventually got debunked? Leave a comment down below. If you've read the book, what did you think of it? Were there parts that you liked, that you didn't like? Or have you read some of the books by other Priest members that are starting to come out? And if so, what do you think of them? Are they a good read? Are they maybe a little too stilted one way or the other? Let folks know, and we'll keep discussing it in the comments down below. But for now, that is going to wrap this up. Until next week, everybody, have a good time. Check me out over on the Heavy Metallurgy channel with Marty. We've been doing a lot of good content recently, so there's always cool stuff to watch from other content creators on YouTube as well. Everybody take care, and as always, keep banging your head.